Did. All right, so I'm Misty. I'm the coordinator at the Writing Center. If you call or you email the Writing Center, I'm the person you're usually speaking to. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please keep them until the end and I will answer them all. I promise we can hang out and really jump into it. Okay, so welcome to the APA Style Professional Development Workshop. Today we're going to talk about a lot of different things. We're going to talk about how APA relates to other citation styles, why we cite sources, how we cite sources, basic formatting requirements of APA, the link between in-text citations and our reference list, and how to effectively approach and use APA style in a paper. So that's a lot to cover, so I'm going to just jump right in. All right, what is APA? APA stands for the American Psychological Association. APA style rules were created by the American Psychological Association, and they can be found in the APA manual. The manual provides guidelines for writing as well as proper documentation of sources. The first APA manual was published in 1952, and APA puts out a new manual every couple of years. We are currently following the 6th edition manual. Why do we use APA style at Full Sail? There are other citation styles that you might have used in the past, like MLA or Chicago. I know at my high school we used MLA. So why are we different here at Full Sail? We use APA style at Full Sail because it's the accepted citation style for business, and it accommodates the wide range of disciplines that are studied here. Because we offer a lot of classes and degrees in the entertainment business kind of arena, APA just kind of checks all the boxes as far as that goes. So you'll be required to use APA style for every research assignment that requires citation throughout your education here at Full Sail. And every class has at least one assignment that requires library research. So all your course instructors who ask you to cite your sources will expect you to use APA. Because APA is a school-wide approach to citation, it makes sense to learn it early in your career here at Full Sail, and it also makes sense to brush up on it as you go along. All right, why do we cite sources? There are actually a couple of different reasons why we cite sources, and we're going to talk about all of them, or we're going to talk about most of them. When we cite sources, our readers are able to distinguish between our own ideas and information taken from outside sources. That means that we, as writers and creators, get credit for our own ideas, and then we also provide appropriate credit for the ideas of others. When a paper lacks citations, readers sometimes assume that all of the ideas belong to the writer, or they sometimes assume that the writer doesn't know enough about the field that they're writing about to have provided research. If ideas in the paper belong to an outside source and have not been properly documented, this may be considered plagiarism. When we cite sources, we show that we've taken the time to study and understand the research and documentation process, and that we have grounded ourselves in whatever field we are discussing. Utilizing and citing research allows us to support our own ideas, and this is a really important one, you guys. It makes our arguments more credible. One of the reasons that we want to make our arguments more credible in this way is that if I state something as if it's fact, and I provide documentation about that fact and where I got it, you are more likely to believe that I have done appropriate research. If I state a fact, but then I can't tell you where I found it or why I believe it to be true, you're going to start to call into question whether I have done that appropriate research. Another reason that I think it's important to learn APA, and this one is not quite as connected to some of these ideas of credibility as the others are, but a lot of you guys want to work in degrees and in fields that you will be presented with like style guidebooks and kind of rules that you have to follow. So for instance, I'm a writer. I love writing. And when I write, I'm often asked to follow specific guidelines and follow specific formulas like style guides. But some of them are more specific than even APA is. So the idea there is whether you're using APA or just a style guidebook of some other variety, it's not unlikely that you would run across the need in your career to follow guidelines. And if you get used to applying this concept of APA to your work, you'll be able to follow those style guides more easily in your career. All right. What needs to be cited is any information that comes from an outside source. So this can include quotes or paraphrases, summaries, images, audio, video, game elements, computer software, and other media. So let's talk about quotes. A quote is a word-for-word passage from an outside source. You have to cite all quotes that are used in your paper. Quotes require quotation marks. And it's important that you differentiate between quotations, which again are a word-for-word passage from someone else's either work or interviews or something like that. And then paraphrases, which a paraphrase is when you take a fact or an idea from an outside source and you put it into your own words. You have to cite paraphrases as well, but they're slightly different than quotes. And then we have summaries, which are very close to a paraphrase. The difference between a summary and a paraphrase is with a summary, you're putting the main idea of a piece of writing into your own words. So a paraphrase is a specific idea. Think about it. It's like almost like a sentence for sentence. Like a paraphrase, you would take a sentence from a source and you'd rewrite it into a new sentence in your own words. And then a summary is when you kind of take the whole concept from a piece and you summarize it into, a sentence or two. Again, summaries also must be cited. All right, what about the audio, video, images, and other media? They also need to be cited. There are two different ways to cite media. One citation style to use when you discuss media in a paper, and another citation style to use when you include media in a presentation. And we'll talk about those differences in just a moment. All right, what does not need to be cited? We don't need to cite common knowledge. So of course the next question is, awesome, what's common knowledge? Ideas that are available in a variety of sources or generally accepted facts, such as pollution is bad for the environment or writing is a process, do not need to be cited. Now, if you're becoming more specific with that idea, right? If you were going to say pollution is bad for the environment and throwing food out your car window is pollution, you might need to cite some of your sources for that. So the idea is that these kind of broad or generally accepted facts don't need to be cited. You can usually determine that something is common knowledge if you can find the same information undocumented in multiple credible sources. So if you could find it in like 4 or 5 credible sources and they're not citing where they found it, you're probably also okay. That isn't a particularly straightforward answer. And I know that for a lot of students, that is frustrating. So I will say this. If you are not sure if what you are citing is common knowledge or not, or what you're quoting is common knowledge or not, just cite it. It's better safe than sorry. Some other things that need to be cited include findings from preliminary experimentation or experiments that you conduct yourself, and then original audio, video, or images that you have created. Again, when in doubt, cite using APA style. So in the next section, we're going to talk about the basics of formatting requirements in APA. There are 3 major elements of an APA paper: your title page, in-text citations, and your reference entry list. So We're going to talk about those in more detail. Let's talk about the title page. This is what a title page should look like. And if you are unsure how to set this title page up, at the end of the presentation, I will be putting some links into our chat box. And one of the links that I will give you guys is a YouTube video that walks you through the process for setting up your title page. I'll be honest, it's not hard to do, but it's hard to remember how to do it. And so I always just pull this YouTube video up and watch it anytime I get questions on this because I forget all the time. So I'm going to also recommend that you just bookmark it. All right, so let's look at the elements of the title page. Every title page has a header, the words running head, followed by a colon, and the title of your paper, which should be in all caps, appears flush left on the header. Now, one thing to be aware of is if you look at what's in our header, Full Sail Writing Center's sample, this is different from the entire title, which is Full Sail Writing Center's sample formatting in APA style. So what actually shows up in your running head is a shortened version of your title. So every title page has a header, the words running head, we got that. And then the page number should appear flush right in the header. You'll have a different header on your title page than you do on the rest of your document. On the rest of the pages, you drop the words running head and the colon, and you just put the shortened title in all caps. All right, centered about halfway down the page, the title of your paper will appear on the first line. Your name gets its own line, and finally the name of your school is on the final line. Now, you don't need anything else on your title page. You may or may not be required to include an abstract in your document. Usually abstracts are only included with longer research papers, but when it's required, the abstract is a brief summary of your paper that immediately follows the title page. The abstract should look like this. It should include the page header with the title of the paper in all caps flush left and the page number flush right. It should be double spaced. And the word abstract should be centered with no bold, formatting, italics, underlining, or quotation marks. And then the abstract should be about 150 to 250 words long. This may vary based on assignment requirements, so pay attention to what your instructor is asking for. And then you may include key words in your abstract. You don't have to, but you might want to. And if you do include keywords, you indent as you would if you were starting a new paragraph. Then you type keywords in italics, and then you type your keywords. All right. Again, remember guys, an abstract is not always required. The next two components are really the most important parts of the APA paper, and they're in-text citations and the reference list. APA paper or APA style calls for both. I'm getting a question from Trevor about an author's note. So Trevor, that's not required for an APA paper. You might be asked to include one, but it's not a requirement, so we don't really talk about it in this workshop. If you have more specific questions about that, I'm more than willing to help you with it. But again, it's not a requirement that is likely to pop up very often. Okay, so the next two components, again, are in-text citations and the reference entry list, and they're extremely important for the APA style. You can't have one without the other. They're kind of like our wonderful image here, milk and cookies. They go together. So in-text citations are used in the body of the document. An in-text citation specifies which source a particular piece of information, like a quote or a paraphrase or an image, is from. And then the reference list appears at the end of the document and gives detailed publication about each source cited in the document. So your in-text citations can then tell us where to find the publication information for our resources, which you can then look up later on. If we didn't have in-text citations, we wouldn't be able to identify which ideas in a paper come from an outside source. And if we didn't have the reference list, we wouldn't be able to find the references used throughout the paper. So in the next few sections, we're going to be going through a lot of specific detail about formatting. Don't feel like you have to memorize everything I say. It's a lot of information. And a little bit later, we'll talk about some resources where you can find the same information when you need it. All right, so we'll talk about in-text citations first. What should the in-text citations look like? The format for in-text citations can vary depending on whether the information cited is a quotation, a summary, or a paraphrase. There are two basic formats that we use. The first example you'll notice is a quote from a Writing Center blog post. Here, we've used the author's last name in a sentence after the words according to. We've put the date in the parentheses immediately after the author's name and the page number in parentheses at the end of the sentence. In this case, we don't actually have a page number because it's an online blog, so we've used the paragraph number instead. When we put the author's name in the sentence like this, it's called a signal phrase. So we've used according to Chapman, but you could also say something like Chapman, parentheses, 2012, close parentheses, states, right? When you quote, blah, blah, blah. So it's just when you actually embed the author and the year of publication into the sentence with the quote. That's called a signal phrase. Or you can also do what we call a parenthetical, which is our second example. Notice we don't have a signal phrase. Instead, we put the author's last name, the year, and the page number or paragraph number at the end of the quote. Either of these formats is acceptable. I think that the signal format is sometimes just a little bit easier to read because you're kind of leading your reader into the quotation. But again, either of them is acceptable. Let's take a little bit of a closer look at the format for citing quotes. In APA style, there are two formats for citing quotes in text. One format is for quotes under 40 words and another format for quotes over 40 words. So this is an example, again, of a quote that's under 40 words, as was our last examples, as were our last examples, I should say. So quotes that are less than 40 words, like this one, need quotation marks surrounding the actual quote, the author's last name, the year, and the page or paragraph number. And then periods appear at the very end of the citation, not the end of the sentence. If the quote is more than 40 words, it should look like this example. Notice we must use a signal phrase. In this case, Chapman 2012 states. We don't need quotation marks, but the quote is actually, it's a little hard to see here, but the quote would be indented and start on a new line. Oops. Hit the wrong thing. Sorry, guys. And then the other thing that we have to be aware of, and it's a very strange APA rule. I can't really explain it. I don't really understand why. I'm sure someone somewhere does. But in this format, and only this format, the period appears at the end of the sentence rather than at the end of the citation. And we haven't done it here, but if you omit words, phrases, or sentences within a quote, be sure to use ellipses to show that you've removed something from the middle. All right, so that's it on quotes. Let's talk about paraphrases. In this example, we're citing a paraphrase. We used an idea from the article we're citing, but we didn't use a word-for-word quote. We put the idea into our own words. So we still need to include the author's last name as well as the year of publication, but with paraphrases, it's not necessary to include a page number or a paragraph number. We've used kind of a signal phrase here, and you can use a parenthetical for paraphrases as well. So Chapman would also be in parentheses at the end of the sentence. But I think especially with paraphrases and summaries, it's nice to use that signal phrase. All right, so summaries look very, very similar. As with a paraphrase, again, we still need to cite the author's last name and the year of publication, but not the page number. All right, sometimes you will encounter the dreaded tricky in-text citations. They don't include the information that you need to create an in-text citation for example, the author's name, date, or page number. So how do we handle those sources? If there's no author listed, you can use the first few relevant words in the title or the article of the book in place of the author's name. The title should be put in quotation marks, and everything else remains the same. Now, if you use this, your reference entry list should also use the title of the article or the book in the author's name. There's a different way that you can do this as well, which is an organization as an author. If there's no specific author listed, but the information comes from an organization or company's document or website, for example, a study by the Food and Drug Administration or a quarterly earnings report from a company like Verizon, we're unlikely to have authors put on those kinds of reports because multiple people work on them. So you would use the organization or the name of the company instead of an author's name. Now, again, if you've done this instead of the article title, this like Food and Drug Administration or AT&T or Verizon or whatever would be in the author's position on your reference list. Because again, you want your in-text citations to lead to your reference list. All right. If no date is listed, you can't just leave out that information. You have to actually use the abbreviation ND, which means no date. And then our last one, often page numbers are not available if we're citing an online source. So if you're citing a quotation, you should cite the paragraph number where you found the quote. So for example, if the quote was in the second paragraph, you would cite para 2. If you're citing a paraphrase or a summary, again, you don't need the page number, so you don't need to include that. Okay, here's our next big one, and this one is a real doozy. Reference lists. They're the third major element of the APA paper. We'll start by looking at formatting requirements. Every title page needs a header. The header should look like the rest of the headers in the paper with the exception of the title page header. And with the title of your paper in all caps, flush left, and the page number, flush right. Sorry, excuse me, you guys. References should be centered at the top of the page. Again, you don't need to bold, italicize, or underline this. And then your sources should be listed alphabetically by author's last name, if an author has more than one work organized by date of publication. The reference list should be double-spaced with no extra spaces between sources. And every line after the first line of each entry should be indented. This is called a hanging indent, and again, when I post all those links in the chat box, I will give you a YouTube video on how to create a hanging indent if you don't know. Electronic sources should include clickable URLs, and that's what your reference page should look like. All right, so let's take a closer look at reference list entries. The first step in deciding how to cite a source is to decide what type of source you have. Is your source a book, a magazine, a newspaper article, a website, a personal interview, a YouTube video, or some other type of print or electronic source? APA has specific rules for citing different kinds of sources. I will say that each entry, regardless of the type of source, will contain the author's name if known, the title of the work, and publication information. That publication information is really where the type of source starts to vary. It's important to identify the type of source you have and then look for an example of how to cite that particular source. For this example, we're looking at a reference entry for a blog. However, if we were citing a book or an online newspaper or a video game, the citation would have a slightly different format. We list the author by last name and first initial of first name. In this example, we have a single author, but your source may have multiple authors, no author, or an organization as an author. The date in parentheses comes after the author. In this case, we're citing a blog, so we actually need the complete date, including the year, month, and day. For other types of entries, you only need the year. But again, you need to check examples for your specific type of source to see which you need. Notice that only the first letter of the first word in the book or article title is capitalized. Every word that comes after the first word begins with a lowercase letter. Proper nouns are the exception, as is the first word that follows a colon. Both of those are always capitalized. Each line after the first line of the entry is indented, and for a blog citation, we have to note whether it's a blog or a blog comment, which you would put in brackets. And for any electronic source, we need a URL, and the words retrieved from are followed by the permalink to the source. I'm going to pause here and tell you guys something to be wary of. If you use a citation maker, like if you go to a website that will like make your citations for you, which I highly recommend you do not do. But if you do that, often retrieved from between those words, there will be a date inserted, and it will be the date that you found the source. That is not needed in APA, and it's a really wonderful indicator that you have not gone to used an actual APA style guide to look at your sources. So if you are going to use one of those reference entry list makers, do yourself the kindness to actually still check them, because they often include things that you don't need, or they'll be missing one important piece. All right. So that's the basic reference entry. Now we're going to talk about the tricky ones, again, when we don't know the author's name or the date of publication. Okay, so for this example, we're going to pretend that we don't have an author listed. The article title moves to the front of the citation in place of the author's last name, and then everything else remains the same. We need all the same information. And then if we're using an organization as an author, in this case, the Full Sail Writing Center, that goes to the front as if it's the author's name, and then everything else follows the same. Then let's pretend that this has no author and no date. So we've used the article title as the author, and then we have ND. All right, so that is our reference list. I know that we had a question about a specific type of reference, and at the end I'll cover that and I'll show you guys my favorite resource to use for those types of things. But I want to talk about how we cite media in a paper now. For example, let's say we're in a photography class and our instructor has asked us to find a photograph online and discuss its composition. We aren't including the image in the paper, we're just referring to it. How would we cite that? If you're referring to a specific piece of media in your paper, you need to cite it in APA style using both an in-text citation and a reference sheet. This is a sample citation for an image, and you would also need to cite this. This is how you would also cite other media, such as video games, music, computer, etc. Some of those require a little bit more information, and so you would need to find an example of that type of source and then provide that information. Again, I'll show you some really good resources for that. All right, so what if you're actually using a piece of media in a presentation? An image or a video taken from the internet. If you're reproducing an image in your presentation, you need to follow these 3 steps in order to cite it correctly. You need to check the copyright license and make sure the image is licensed for reuse under Creative Commons. And you also need to include an image URL on each slide where the image appears in the presentation. For instance, if you look at the bottom left of this image, kind of right above where the chalk would go, there is a URL. It doesn't, so anytime you have an image like on your slide like this is, you need to include a URL for it. And then you need to include a reference slide in APA style. Here is an example of a reference page. All right. How to find images. There are a couple of places to look for images that are licensed for reuse. You can go to places like compfight.com. Compfight is nice because they actually have like a really nice frequently asked questions that you can use their FAQ and find out more about like licensing and things like that. And then you can also use the library database. We have a couple library databases that have images in them, and you can use those as well. So if you are not familiar with the library databases, I suggest that you maybe reach out to the library, log on to Connect, and check them out because they are really, really, really useful and you will use them a lot. All right, at this point, you're probably feeling a little overwhelmed. APA has a lot of really specific rules, and it's a lot to remember. But here's the thing. You don't actually have to have a photographic memory to use APA. You mostly just need to follow these tips. First, you want to become familiar with the basic elements of an APA paper, which we just did. Second, you need to pay attention to your instructor's requirements so that you can actually follow those requirements. My third tip is to always use a manual as a reference. They're available in the library. If they're available in the Full Sail library, they're also available in most public libraries. If you can't find a physical manual to flip through, you can always refer to an online APA resource. I'll give you a couple of my favorite ones in the chat log at the end of the presentation as well. My other tip is to always double check your formatting. Double check your in-text citations and reference list entries against examples that appear in the manual or the online resources. After you've created your entries, go back and check them again to make sure they match. And my final tip is when in doubt about a documentation issue, reach out to your instructor or make an appointment with the Writing Center. For more information about the Writing Center, you can visit our website on Connect. I'll actually show you guys where that is in just a minute. You can read more about APA, you can find out how we can help during appointments, and you can also find out how to schedule appointments. At this time, I'm going to open up the floor to questions, and I'm also going to start putting those links in the chat box. So I'm seeing a couple of different questions pop up. So can I make more than one statement consecutively and use the same citation for 2 or 3 statements taken from the same source at the end of the last statement? If they come from multiple places in the source, but you've combined them into one sentence, is that what you're asking, Joseph? Because you can make one citation entry, or I'm sorry, one in-text citation, all from the same source, but you have to show that they come from different places, which is usually fairly confusing. In that case, I'm wondering if summarizing it might be better. Does APA require a certain font, like how MLA uses Times New Roman? Yes, it does. You need to use Times New Roman as well. It's easiest to read. You could probably also use Arial, but usually it's just, I would say you're never going to go wrong with Times New Roman, so I would use that one. Joseph, if you are separating multiple in-text citations, as in you have a parenthetical and you've used quotes from 2 separate sources or multiple places in one source, you would use a semicolon to separate those. I don't know of a time when you would use a colon in an in-text citation. All right, guys, I am going to put some links in the chat box. Keep throwing your questions out if you have them. This is the link for the YouTube video for the title page creation. This is the link for the hanging indent. This is the link for my absolute favorite online resource. This is an okay online resource. Actually, I should be nice about the Purdue OWL. The Purdue OWL is incredible and it's extremely detailed. It's just really hard to use. I'm going to pull up a couple of other ones that I really like. Joshua is asking, in the event that you were present for the topic at hand, would you be able to reference your personal knowledge for your assignment or use images that you've taken yourself? I need more information about the type of event that you're asking for. For instance, if you are writing a journalistic kind of article, it's fine to talk about your perspective and things of that nature, but I doubt that you would be considered a credible source if your teacher has asked for 3 outside sources. I don't think you would count as one of them. I would recommend asking your instructor about that, Joshua, if I'm getting it all close to the type of question you're having. But I'm also not quite sure that I'm understanding your question. Joseph is asking if you can use the APA citations taken from Google Scholar. If Google Scholar offers you a citation, it's fine to start there. Again, I would highly recommend that you go to an APA online resource or manual and double check that they've done it correctly. Because I've had a lot of experience where even places, even like databases will often give you a citation, like a reference list entry, and they'll actually be kind of a conglomeration of MLA, APA, and Chicago. They'll have everything that you need for all 3 of them listed. And so you'll end up with information that isn't correct for your APA citation. This is a really good one to use. ProjectAPA.info and this one that I'm posting right now were both made at Full Sail, and I like them a lot. ProjectAPA.info is one of my favorites because it's super easy to use. Someone was asking how you cite an audiobook, and my guess is that if ProjectAPA.info doesn't have it, oh, they don't. I'm so flabbergasted. The other place I would look is here, the blog at the APA style blog. And my APA style blog is also failing me, you guys. Let's see. I wonder if it would be similar to an ebook. I might have to look that up. I'm sorry, it was at the very beginning and I don't remember who asked about the audiobook. I might have to look that up, and if you want to send me your email address, if it takes me a little bit longer to find the answer for you, I can email you with the resource once I've found it. All right. I am not seeing, let me make a note of that, you guys. I am not seeing many more questions pop up. So if you do have questions, please, please, please feel free to post them and let me know. What you are working on or what you have questions about. If you have kind of more in-depth questions and you don't really want to get into them here in this presentation, please feel free to make an appointment with the Writing Center. I can show you where to do that. If you go to Connect and you go to the Writing Center and you click right here, Writing Center Appointment Request Form, you can definitely get an appointment. I will be here for a little while longer answering questions. So ask them if you have them.